Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Avila, and I am the coordinator of the Virginia Consortium for Teacher Preparation in Blindness and Vision Impairment. I'm going to share with you some information today about students with visual impairments that are of the public school age and that you might encounter in general and special education situations. I want you to first consider the question, true or false? People are either totally sighted or totally blind. And think about that. Is that true or is that false? Can we either see completely or not at all? And the answer to that is false. That statement is false. Blindness and vision impairment represents a spectrum of vision. So from the totally sighted realm to the totally blind realm, there is a middle ground that encompasses pretty diverse and vast visual characteristics that can impact our students when they are in the classroom and accessing the educational environment. In fact, there's only a very small percentage, approximately 10% of people who are considered legally blind and blind who are totally blind. Our students that are in our schools have ocular causes for blindness and vision impairment. And this means that the student might have something with the eye, the retina, the optic disc, and the optic nerve that impacts their vision. They might have reasons for different types of visual impairment related to the eye muscles, the way the eyes align, and the way that the eyes function together. So our eyes are very complex structures with lots of very fine details and really unique and simple, but very detailed and complicated elements that any one of them that can be altered in some capacity can cause a vision impairment. We also have a lot of students who have brain-based reasons for visual impairment. And this includes students who might be suspected or diagnosed with cortical and cerebral vision impairment. So this is a brain-based condition where the student may have typical eyes, a typical retina, and optic disc, but as the vision passes through the eye and retina and goes to the brain, they have a processing or a condition that can't interpret what's being seen, or what is being seen is not fully vision based that we would know in a typical eyesight. We know that cortical vision impairment is actually the leading cause of blindness and vision impairment in the United States. And we also know that we have a number of students who have a combination of ocular and neurological reasons for blindness and vision impairment. So about 30 to 40% of children with visual impairments with ocular vision impairment also have cortical vision impairment in some capacity. We have students who have vision-related conditions that don't really necessarily say that they have impaired eyesight or acuity, but they do have ocular motor function or convergence insufficiency or visual processing disorders that do impact them in education. And so these students can definitely be found eligible under VI depending on how that vision condition impacts them. And there are so many other things to consider aside from just the ocular and other functioning of the eye. And going along with that, we have clinical and educational definitions of visual impairment. And these definitions vary significantly simply because in the medical realm, there are reasons why people are labeled and diagnosed with certain levels of vision loss. And then there are educational definitions, primarily from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that helps us and guides us in that process of determining, is a student visually impaired under IDEA's criteria? So under IDEA, it's actually very vague, and this takes a lot of people by surprise. IDEA clearly states that visual impairment, including blindness, means an impairment in vision that even with correction adversely affects a child's educational performance. The term includes both partial sight and blindness. So this is a very broad definition. And OSEP has thankfully given us some guidance, but also states have their definitions of visual impairment that builds from IDEA. I have Virginia's code posted on the screen, and going along with that same theme, we as eligibility teams, when we receive a referral for eligibility considerations under special education visual impairment, we need to look at that adverse effect on the child's educational performance. And Virginia Code further goes on to say, does that student have any condition, including but not limited to ocular motor apraxia, cortical vision impairment, progressive loss of vision, and which may affect the student in the future. So they might not be vision impaired right now, but they will be in the future potentially, that they have an adverse effect on educational performance. Then Virginia Code goes on to define a couple of the other levels, such as legal blindness, which is 2200 acuity or a field of vision of 20 degrees or less, and visual impairment, which is 2200 degrees or worse. Between 2200 and 2070 best corrected vision, or a field of vision of 20 to 70 degrees. And all of these elements look at best corrected visual acuity. How is that child functioning with their glasses or contacts or any medications that they might need for vision conditions? OSEP has given us very clear guidance over the years about ensuring the definition under IDEA is not misinterpreted. So OSEP Memo 1705 that came out in 2017 really wanted to make sure states were clear in that we are not limiting the definition of vision impairment in education based off of acuity and field of vision alone. So that is why Virginia does have this criteria, has any condition, but not limited to ocular motor apraxia, cortical vision impairment, because we have students who do not have impaired acuity, they do not have impaired field of vision, but they have something else going on that they really do need special education services under visual impairment. So I've mentioned these definitions, and I gave you some numbers, 2200 and field of vision and so much more. And what do some of these definitions mean? And so I'm going to give you the clinical definitions of blindness and vision impairment so you can kind of piece these together. Keeping in mind, though, that your student does not have to be diagnosed with a lack of acuity in their eyes or a lack of field of vision to be considered eligible and to be up for eligibility under visual impairment. You might have a student who has been diagnosed clinically with no light perception. This means that the student is totally blind. They have no eyesight. And as I said earlier, this is a case where the student, these cases are much more rare. We don't have a lot of people who are totally blind. We do have more people who have light perception only, meaning they can see light. They can detect when the smartboard is on in the classroom based off of the light, or a monitor or a television. They can tell when it's light out because they can perceive the sunlight and overhead lights that are on. We have students who will be clinically considered legally blind. So in one of the criteria that a student could be found eligible under is legal blindness. And that means that the student has that acuity of 2200 and that they have the field of vision that is less than 20 degrees field of vision. We have students who can be considered low vision, and we have students with severe, moderate, and mild visual impairment. So that legal blindness definition, 2200, what does that mean? I have an old school Snellen chart on screen. Most eye doctors will not be using a Snellen chart. These are outdated, but it does give us a frame of reference because most people know what that big E is on the eye chart. If you have a student with their best glasses or contact lenses, surgeries have been done, medications have been taken, and the best they can see is that letter E on top, that means they are legally blind. That means they can see from 20 feet what a person from 200 feet away can see. That constitutes legal blindness. they might have a field of vision of 20 degrees or less. Inside of that circle, inside of their field of vision, they may be able to see 20/20. They might be able to read the smallest line on the chart, but they can only see a small amount. So think about looking through a paper towel roll or smaller. That's what we're dealing with. And this impacts students in education. It can impact their safety in traveling, being able to scan and read for prolonged periods of time, being able to engage visually and use the eyesight throughout the day is going to be potentially impacted. We have several agencies and programs that define low vision. I did put one of the examples of low vision. An individual, a person who has measurable vision but has difficulty accomplishing or cannot accomplish visual tasks, even with prescribed or corrective lenses. So this gets into a much more vague discussion. The World Health Organization also provides classifications of visual impairment. You would see this in an eye doctor's office, whether it's an ophthalmologist, which is a medical eye doctor, or an optometrist, which is a specialist in vision as well, but they are not medical doctors usually. And the World Health Organization and the ICD codes for diagnosing visual impairment, they have criteria following that. But again, in education, we look at more than just acuity and field of vision. We look at that impact on education and other things that are affecting that child as well. I also included the National Eye Institute's definitions, the Prevention of Blindness Society. And the reason I did this is because we have a huge range of what vision impairment is called and defined as. And so we need to make sure we're aware of that clinically, because we might have a student who's been diagnosed clinically with visual impairment, but that can mean a variety of things. So our students really represent a spectrum of functional vision characteristics. And I really want you to remember that term, functional vision, because there are so many things that impact our eyesight. Our eyesight is so much more than sitting at the eye doctor's office and reading a chart at the end of the room, whether it's on a screen or whatnot. Our eyesight can impact us, and it can impact students in education. I've listed just some of the characteristics that can affect functional vision in education and throughout the life. Things like depth perception. We can have students who have little to no depth perception, and we have quite a few considerations. We have students with monocular vision, which means they're not using their eyes bilaterally and binocularly. So we have students with very severe and significant glare and light sensitivity, students who actually have challenges with dim lighting. So again, it's that spectrum. Some students are sensitive to light. Some students need more light, just depends. Some students have challenges fluctuating between light and dark. They have color vision needs. Contrast and clutter are huge considerations in the visual presentation of materials. And we think about educational environments, websites, textbooks, worksheets can oftentimes be very cluttered. We can have students who have scotomas. They can have loss of vision in patches of the eye, which sometimes can be more difficult to detect than field of vision or acuity. We have students with visual processing considerations, visual latency, which means that it's taking them a little bit longer to recognize and understand what they're seeing and interacting with. We have young children, especially with delayed visual maturation, that the eye and the brain are just taking a little bit longer to connect to be able to help that child use their eyesight and understand what they're seeing. We have lots of students with visual motor skill considerations, scanning, tracking, locating, fixating, using the eyes, using the eye muscles. It's actually a very complex process. And if you think about all the things with fine motor skills that can be a challenge for a number of students, eyes actually are very similar. All the muscles working together, all of the processing and the connections that need to take place. We can have students who have vision considerations. They have highly usable eyesight. In fact, they may not be impaired at all. They might be able to see 20/20 on the eye chart, but the way that their eyes are working are just not working together. We have students with convergence insufficiency. So if you think about when you're reading, when you hold a book to read, your eyes typically, and for a lot of people, they will converge. The eyes will come together a little bit, and you read, and then let's say you need to look up to read something at a distance, the eyes will diverge and separate just a little bit back to straight alignment. Some students don't do that. They simply, their eyes cannot do that. They have convergence insufficiency. We have students whose eyes have other alignment considerations. This is called strabismus. So one eye might be turning in or out or up or down. Both eyes might be doing something else. We have students with involuntary eye movements called nystagmus, and those are involuntary. The eye might be shaking or moving. We have neurological implications. We have students who deal with vision fatigue. So reading for a very short period of time can actually cause headaches. It can cause brain fog. It can cause them to be unfocused and experience discomfort. So just some of them, and I could literally go on for hours because there are dozens of more to be aware of that affect students in general. So because we have a known increase in the number of students who have brain-based vision impairment, cortical and cerebral, I do want to briefly go over some of the traits and characteristics. And a number of our students with CVI have multiple disabilities. They might be in the adapted curriculum. And I do need to know, I'm listing out 10 of the traits and behaviors, also called characteristics of CVI. But as of recording this in February 2023, there is going to be new information coming out within the next couple of months that further define and give more traits and characteristics. So please be aware there will be an update. Our students with CVI will experience in general most of these characteristics. So where students with ocular vision impairment, it's a hodgepodge of the visual traits that they experience. A lot of our students with CVI experience most, if not all, of the characteristics of CVI. You will notice your student has a very strong preference for highly saturated colors, reds, yellows, dark purples. They are more likely to respond to visual stimuli when there is movement involved. They do experience also visual latency, so taking a while to understand what's being seen. Visual clutter and visual complexity are huge considerations. So we oftentimes have to have a black background with one item if they are in the earlier phases of CVI. They may be more responsive to light. Distance viewing is a challenge because they're more responsive to looking at things up close and things that are within just maybe a foot or two of their face or their person. A lot of people with CVI have a visual field preference in the upper field of vision. So for some people with CVI, there is no clinical reason for them not to have vision in the lower parts of their eyes, but they do miss things in the lower periphery. You might notice there's an absence of the visual blink reflex. Your student might have preferences for objects that are familiar and they know, and they might have challenges with visual novelty, so things that are new to them. And then you might also notice there's a lack of a visually guided reach. So the student might look at something, turn their head, and then try to reach for it without even looking at it. So huge variations. CVI has 3 phases, and we do have interventions and supports to help students work through this process. But a presence of most or a lot of these characteristics could indicate that your student may have CVI. We as teachers, we never diagnose this. We do not diagnose CVI. We do not diagnose ocular vision impairment, but we do look out for traits, and we do have to help the team determine is there impact because there are things going on with that student. So many of our students have multiple disabilities, and we know that anywhere from 50 to 70% of students who are blind and vision impaired have multiple disabilities, and that can range from other sensory impairment to physical disability to cognitive, to intellectual and cognitive impairment, everything else, autism, you name it. But we also have students who are highly gifted, have high intellect. We have students who have multiple disabilities who are blind and vision impaired, and they also have are in AP classes, honors classes, and just because they're vision impaired does not mean they should ever be considered not eligible for AP or honors, given that they have the characteristics and academic ability to take part in those classes. So I'm going to ask you another question now. Blindness and vision impairment, true or false, is a high incidence disability in early childhood and the school years in the United States. Think about that for a second. So the answer to this is actually false. So in the United States, blindness and vision impairment is much, much more common in adulthood. In our aging population, we have age-related conditions, people getting age-related macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, cataracts, accidents, injuries, multiple health conditions, autoimmune, etc. So the presence of vision impairment in adulthood is much, much higher. In childhood, it's very low. So I'm going to give you some data and statistics, and I want you to pay attention to these because you're going to notice some discrepancies in the numbers. Our information that I have here from 2017, VDOE reported that primary eligibility in blindness and vision impairment was 1,515. That is primary eligibility. That does not include secondary or tertiary. It does not include students who may be put on related services for some reason. That is primary only. So a lot of our students who have other disabilities, other health impairment, they're found eligible primarily under that condition, and then vision might be another one. The Virginia Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired last year reported that we had 2,500 students ages 0 through through age 22. And that they serve, and those students are students who are legally blind and the lower vision. The American Printing House for the Blind reports legally blind students serve. So again, that 2,200, there's 63,500. And again, this does not represent many cases of cortical vision impairment or students who are visually impaired or students who have those ocular motor considerations. And I point that out because the American Community Survey in 2018 reported there were actually 559,943 youth with reported vision difficulty, meaning that even with their glasses or contacts, they were still having some trouble accessing things visually. So educators, a few takeaways I'd like you to gather from this. First of all, vision impairment is not always obvious. The stereotypes that exist out there, a lot of our students, it's actually kind of hard to tell, especially if they have highly usable functional vision. So you will have students in your schools who have various vision abilities. You will have students who fall through the cracks during the vision screenings, but they actually still have vision considerations. So please be aware of that. Think about those characteristics. Think about how is your student reading? Are there explanations for them fatiguing so quickly or for them having trouble reading and using their eyes together? And maybe they're looking close at things and so on. And it's important to consult with a teacher of students who are blind and visually impaired, a TBVI. You can always make an eligibility referral just because your student has eyesight and highly usable eyesight potentially. That does not mean that they don't get referred for eligibility consideration. And when you do an eligibility referral, a TBVI should be part of that team. They must be part of that team if there is any consideration about vision impairment, blindness, cortical vision impairment, and so on. So that term, TBVI, teacher of students who are blind and visually impaired, also known as a teacher of the visually impaired. And we also have had previous titles. Some people have called us vision teachers, vision itinerants, vision specialists, and so on. We're teachers of the blind and vision impaired, and some people, changed the wording just a little bit. What we are not is we are not vision therapists. We do not provide vision therapy. We provide educational supports in the academic and school environment for our students. And if you want to know what your TBVI does, first of all, a few things. TBVIs are a very, very critical shortage in Virginia and beyond. So it's really important that you connect with the right people. But the Virginia Department of Education has published the guidelines for working with students who are blind and vision impaired in Virginia public schools. And this is a fabulous document to help guide you through that process. The Council for Exceptional Children, DVI, DB, Division on Visual Impairment and Deaf Blindness, also has a position paper published that gives very clear information on what a TBI is, a teacher of the blind and vision impaired. CEC also has the skills and knowledge, which goes into the intense detail of what we do and how we support students. And it's pretty expansive. Our jobs are very challenging, very rewarding, and most of us stay in this field for a very, very long time because we do enjoy it so much. So you're going to want to consult with that TBVI for a lot of different things. And this is just a very brief summary, a very short summary. Those eligibility referrals, again, any type of vision consideration. Your student may or may not be coming with an eye exam documenting a vision impairment or a vision diagnosis. They may or may not be. The TBVI, if there is a consideration about vision impairment, you're going to want to consult with that TBI, put them on the eligibility team. We will conduct our assessments. So usually when we get an initial eligibility, we will conduct a functional vision assessment and possibly a learning media evaluation. The functional vision assessment, we look at how is that child using their eyesight. So all those things I mentioned earlier, everything from are they glare sensitive? Are their eyes fatiguing? Are they dealing with challenges with visual contrast and depth perception? We look at those and how they manifest in the educational environment. And we will look at any eye doctor reports that have been provided. We'll interview the family. We'll talk to the teachers if the student is in school. We'll talk to caregivers and just get an idea of how that child functions. Oftentimes, we'll complete a learning media evaluation either in conjunction with the FEA or separately. The learning media evaluation helps us look at how is that student interacting with content presented at near, medial, and distance. So at near, how are they interacting with print? How efficient are they? Is there potential that they might need accommodations if we do find them eligible? How do they access content presented at a distance, like on the smartboard or the screen or whatever the school is using? How are we going to make sure that the student is getting access to the academic environment? So from the functional vision assessment, we'll also look at things like PE. Are there considerations, safety and functional vision needs in PE, in the cafeteria, in the library, media center, working in labs, and so on. So this is a very comprehensive process. It is time consuming. So it's best to get the TBVI involved from the get-go as soon as you suspect and have referred for eligibility consideration. Once we do our FBLMAs, we will generally help the rest of the team conduct theirs. So if there are vision considerations, if we know the student, they're going to need some lighting accommodations or large print or Braille or something else, we can help the rest of the team conduct their assessment. So if the student is getting a Woodcock-Johnson, we know the student is visually impaired, we could help get the adapted version, the enlarged version, or we can help the team make necessary accommodations so that vision doesn't become as much of a factor. And then, of course, we're going to help the team interpret what might be vision, what might be not. And then we're going to assist the team with the eligibility decision. And again, keeping in mind the Virginia guidelines and the Virginia code, that we don't just look at acuity and field of vision, we look at the whole picture. We look at how functional vision and how other characteristics are impacting them, potentially adversely impacting them in the educational environment, and the team will render their decision. So once a student is found eligible for services under special education for visual impairment, we serve on our IEP teams, of course. We will conduct other assessments if needed. We'll develop the vision impairment related goals. We'll track progress on those. We'll make referrals if necessary, and we'll provide services and to that student and also to the general ed teachers, to the special ed teachers, the school, to help the school understand how to work with a student who has impaired vision, blindness, or other vision related considerations. So that's not uncommon for us to work with the general and special education teachers. We can provide adaptations and accommodations and modifications. We can consult with the entire team and teach them how to make some of the accommodations. So it might be that the student needs large print and we can teach the team how to do that. We might be providing the PE teacher. I notice my student has depth perception considerations. Well, they're going to be playing ball sports potentially in class. They're going to be running. They're going to be going down steps. They're going to access the playground. And things like changing levels in a novel situation might be a challenge for that student. So I'm going to help that team understand what safety provisions and what academic provisions that we need to put in place so they can be successful in the core curriculum in the content. We also provide instruction if the IEP team deems necessary in the expanded core curriculum. And the expanded core curriculum is something that came out by Phil Hatlin in the 1990s. And this is such a powerful model of 9 core areas that students who are blind and visually impaired oftentimes need extra instruction and information in, and specialized teaching from a teacher of the visually impaired, that this has stuck around for decades now. And so we will often find IEP goals in one of these areas that we will provide those services. So where it says compensatory skills, that's things like Braille. We might be teaching the student how to use some various technologies, how to be more independent, how to label their clothing maybe so they can get themselves organized, how to work with their sensory efficiency skills, how to be more proficient tactually or whatnot. So many things. And each one of these domains in the expanded core curriculum represent hundreds of areas that we could potentially work on to help that student get skills necessary to maximize their potential. And one of those skills, and probably one of the most well-known, is Braille. So of course, we as teachers of the blind and visually impaired, we are skilled in determining when Braille instruction is necessary, and that is an IEP team decision, although I'm going to give you some more guidance on that. But Braille is a major component for some of our students. It's how they will access literacy. And Braille, you might have seen Braille, on the elevators and on doors, room numbers and such. And Braille is basically a cell of 6 dots, 1, 2, 3 down the left and 4, 5, 6 down the right. On screen, I have the Braille cell presented in reading form. So Braille is obviously much smaller than what I have presented on screen. It's can fit under the fingertips. And the Braille cell in reading format is presented in those 2 columns and 3 rows. And so we have directional labels for each dot, and we also have numbers for each dot. If you think about a muffin pan or a cupcake pan, the half dozen cupcake pan, if you have one and you have some tennis balls, or you can use muffins or cupcakes, it doesn't really matter, but you can actually practice the Braille alphabet. And so on screen, I have a half dozen muffin pan tin with the letter M, representing dots 1, 3, and 4, which is the letter M in Braille. Now, when we go to write Braille, the Braille cell actually does the splits to accommodate our hands so that we can actually produce Braille with our index fingers, middle fingers, and ring fingers. So our Braille cell does the splits, and that is how we can write Braille on different devices. Braille is extremely adaptable. It's been around for a couple of centuries in its current form. And we have things at the upper right of the screen. I have slates, and we can use something called a slate and stylus, which is really inexpensive to produce Braille. And then on screen, I also have pictured some Braille note takers with refreshable Braille displays. So Braille can actually be very high tech as well. Braille has kept up with technology. It has kept up with all the changes in our society. Braille displays can be paired with iPads, with computers, with smartphones, and so much more. So it's highly adaptable. We can use Braille on paper, and we can use Braille with technology. Braille is a valid form of literacy, by the way. And this is a question I get asked so frequently, but is Braille really literacy? And the answer is yes. Braille meets the criteria of what the National Reading Panel has defined as valid literacy: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. We integrate all of those core elements into Braille literacy, and so the student can be an independent reader. And when we transcribe Braille, we're transcribing English. We're not transcribing from a different language. It is English. Braille also has its own laws. So people oftentimes think that an IEP team needs to determine when Braille is appropriate for a student who's blind or vision impaired. And actually, federal IDEA says quite the opposite. The IDEA says, in the case of a child who's blind or visually impaired, we are to provide for instruction in Braille and the use of Braille unless the IEP team determines after an evaluation that the child's reading and writing skill needs an appropriate reading, writing media of the child's future needs an instruction in Braille, or the use that Braille, I'm sorry, I lost my spot, is not appropriate for the child. So we actually do an assessment to determine when Braille is not appropriate for the child. Braille will be the default literacy mode for students with blindness and vision impairment unless our assessment finds otherwise. Generally, it is a learning media assessment that we will conduct to determine the modes of literacy, whether it is Braille, print, or a combination of Braille and print, whether we need some accommodations such as large print and other factors. So some of the rationale for using Braille with children who have usable eyesight is, again, that visual fatigue. They fatigue after a period of time. They lose their place. They skip things. They misread things. They're not reading on the same level as their classmates. So Braille can actually level that playing field, and Braille is readily available. The device I just showed you can be paired with so many electronic websites and books and electronic information that Braille is readily available. Braille also has grades. We have grade 1 and grade 2 Braille. Uncontracted and contracted Braille. In uncontracted Braille, each letter, number, punctuation mark are individually transcribed. So letter by letter, they're transcribed. But for a lot of students, we do try to move them on to contracted or grade 2 Braille. And that means that we're grouping together letters and whole words and parts of words into smaller forms. This saves space, and it also increases the efficacy by which the student can read. So on screen, I have a quote that reads, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Nelson Mandela. And I've transcribed this in both uncontracted and contracted Braille to give you an example. So uncontracted Braille, I am going letter by letter, each word, education. I will draw your attention to the word education. So education uncontracted, I transcribed letter by letter, but in contracted Braille, I contracted the ED in compliance with rules. So there's a whole governing body for Braille. Education, TION.56N is for TION. The word the, so over in uncontracted, I brailled out THE, but we actually have a whole word contraction for the word the, and so on. So you'll notice the grade 2 side takes up less space, and it also increases the student's efficacy as they're reading and potentially could help their reading speed as well. So there's multiple Braille codes. We are not limited in any way, shape, or form with Braille. We can transcribe STEM content. So yes, trigonometry, geometry, chemistry, biology, physics, whatever, we can Braille it. We have 2 codes for Brailing STEM content. We have UEB Math Science and Nemeth code. And within those, we have the provisions that we need to be able to Braille things like chemistry and math, whether it's basic arithmetic to high level. We can Braille music. You could, if I have a student who is taking world languages in their school, I can Braille that for them. We have specific manuals for formatting. How do we format certain things like a menu or a poem or a play? So many things. So Braille is limitless for our students. Going along with that, we have tactile graphics. So on screen, I have a tactile graphic of South America. So our teachers can make tactile graphics, they can be purchased, and they supplement kids who use Braille and also use their vision to access things, simply because sometimes that supplemental multisensory approach really helps our students. Another main service, which is actually a related service under IDEA, so a student is found eligible under visual impairment, they may be referred for orientation and mobility services. So orientation and mobility is an area of expertise that must be provided by a credentialed O&M instructor. Not all teachers of the visually impaired are qualified or trained in orientation and mobility. I'm going to give you the definition under IDEA. It means services provided to blind or visually impaired children by qualified personnel to enable those students to attain systematic orientation to and safe movement within their environments within the school, home, and community. And I underline and bolded school, home, and community because this is a very important element that some schools seem to overlook. And we want to make sure that our children, our students, are really developing the skills they need in all those environments so they can be successful, both being able to travel to school independently or traveling to the bus stop. And then also once they finish school, that they can be safe and effective travelers in the environment. So IDEA further delineates O&M services and how they're provided and what provisions are given under IDEA. But I want to make sure people are extremely aware. We do teach students how to cross streets with or without a white cane. We do teach students who are blind to go up and down steps with the white cane. We teach students with low vision. Maybe they can't see the cross signal, but they may not always need a white cane and whatnot. So we teach them methods, non-visual methods for access. We teach them how to orient themselves. We give them instruction on route travel using public transportation for all levels of visual impairment. So it does not necessarily for all students include a white cane, but it can. And but the biggest thing I want you to take away from this, the person providing this instruction must be credentialed in orientation and mobility, meaning they completed a degree program and they have the proper credentials. And the reason I say that is it's a highly area dependent on safety. And the methods that we train and teach upon are highly skilled and require a great deal of detail. You would not believe with a white cane how much technique goes into using that white cane and how many different methods we can teach them so they can find their way. We also teach guiding skills. So when you guide a student who's blind or visually impaired, you don't grab them. There is a method. You will have the student obtain contact with your arm and hold just above the elbow in a C shape. And there is a technique of guiding the student by standing just about a half step ahead of the student so they can feel that when you're starting, stopping, going up and down steps and so on. So it's really important that an O&M instructor provides this service because of those safety factors. And if it's done incorrectly, it can jeopardize the student's safety. So the best part of our field is we have awesome technology. We have amazing accommodations, and put in the right hands with a good TBVI and an awesome supportive team at the school, our students can be very, very successful in their academic environment, whether in general ed, in advanced, in special education, or wherever. I'm just going to summarize some. And again, I could spend hours with you all telling you about what we have. So for low vision, there are some simple things that can be prescribed by a clinical low vision evaluation. And this is usually with an optometrist who specializes in low vision. So that doctor might prescribe something called bioptics or a monocular. So on screen, I have those pictured. A monocular is half of a binocular. It's very useful for using for brief amounts of time to look at something at a distance. There are spectacle mounted magnification devices for distance as well. You're all probably aware of handheld magnifiers. I have a display of them on screen from highly magnified magnifiers of 10x and such to dome magnifiers and a pocket magnifier, and so on. And these devices are, again, they are for a person with a visual impairment, they should be prescribed by a clinical low vision evaluation specialist. This isn't the kind of thing that you necessarily can go to the local store and just pick up a magnifier that they have in store. It's something that an eye doctor trained in this is going to recommend the best one for that student. On screen, I have more monoculars and bioptics. Large print is a highly accessible and usable element. So I have low vision. I use large print every single day for my job and my own needs. And so we can simply enlarge things. We can print things off. We can change the font size on, if I'm looking at a large budget and in a spreadsheet, and I need to see, is that a comma, is that a decimal, is that an 8, or is that a 6? I can enlarge it pretty easily and pretty quickly and customize it to my own needs. So your students, things that are created in the school by the teachers, things that you have electronically can be enlarged easily as well. You're going to have students who have preferences for the types of font and also the font size. So generally in a learning media evaluation, I, as a TBVI, I'm going to help the student determine what's a general font size that works for you. Is it 20 font? Is it 18? Is it 24? And we're also going to look at different font styles. Some students really prefer sans serif, and some students might even prefer a serifed font, such as Times New Roman. So serif fonts has some of the little fancier things in them as well. So any items that are an accessible format, we can enlarge and provide. And going along with that accessible electronic commentary, AIM Virginia is a fabulous resource that is available to students with visual impairments and students who have print disabilities that have IEPs. And you can get your digital rights manager from your school, who can order books and materials from AIM Virginia in electronic format. And the student, again, they can customize different settings on it, change colors if need be, print it out, read it electronically. It is a fabulous resource. So make sure you're up to date on that source. The Virginia Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired, which is the Commonwealth of Virginia's Rehabilitation Service Program. They also have educational services for students who are visually impaired and blind. Our teachers of the blind and vision impaired can order Braille books from the LRC in Richmond, and these can consist of Braille textbooks and other items which are available for students who are found eligible. The National Library Service, Library of Congress, has multiple options for audio books. They have regional libraries, talking book libraries that will send out books on devices that can be read. And they also have the Braille and audio reading download BARD app, which our students can be signed up for if they are visually impaired or have a print disability, and they can access leisure reading or other things through this app and through the NLS program. Screen readers are a really common accommodation for students who are blind and low vision, and screen readers are different than text-to-speech and speech-to-text. So speech-to-text is when somebody might dictate into a device and it types for them, it writes it out. We have some students who are blind and visually impaired who might use that either for convenience for simple things or for if they have a mobility or motor impairment. But a lot of our students will actually use a screen reader. So things like JAWS, NVDA, narrator on the Windows computers that's built in, VoiceOver that's built into Mac and iOS devices. These screen readers are interactive. They will read text on the screen and they will also interact. So if I'm on a web page, I need to do check boxes, I need to fill out forms, a screen reader will help. They are different than text-to-speech. Text-to-speech usually only reads static text. Screen readers are more inclusive because they allow you to interact with things that a person not using a screen reader can interact with visually. Of course, there are many, many options for screen magnification that are built into our devices, built into smartphones and tablets, built into our computers as well, and things that can be purchased or acquired separately. We have a variety of handheld digital magnifiers. So I showed you the magnifiers a few minutes ago that are not digital, but we have digital magnifiers. A lot of people also use their smartphones with the camera app, or they download a magnification app on their phone, which is super helpful and nice. But we also have standalone video magnifiers, also known as closed circuit televisions. And these are devices that are can be procured for a student who needs magnification. For you place the book or device or the content on the platform, it magnifies it. And then we also have varieties that magnify at a distance. So on screen, I have a picture of a video magnifier that is actually using the camera to zoom in on the screen at the front of the classroom. And it's zoomed in on a math problem. So it's showing a mathematical formula, and my student would be able to sit and see that formula up close because of their vision impairment. They are not able to see it even from the front row. These same video magnifiers can change colors. They can change contrast of the content that you're putting on there. So you can put a cookbook, you can put a medication bottle that you need to zoom in on. You can do prolonged reading and customize settings, which makes it really super helpful. We oftentimes will use screen share apps with our students. So if they are unable to see the board from a distance, we can use screen share apps. We can use external monitors. These are things that are commonly available and are much, much, much less expensive, but also built into a number of systems that can serve as an accommodation. I'm going to show you some devices called Braille displays and Braille note takers. So on screen, I have an example of a Braille note taker. It is a small device that has a Braille keyboard. So those 6 dots, you'll notice on screen though, there are actually 8 dots, and that's because the 2 extra dots are used for other functionality in that device. And then there is a strip of pins that are actuated that pop up and refresh themselves as you're reading. So your student can read a book with Braille and not have to carry around a massive set of volumes of Braille paper. They can read multiple things on their device, and the Braille display will display it. And it automatically refreshes so they can continue reading on. I have a close-up picture of a touch screen Braille device. And I'm showing on screen other Braille, refreshable Braille displays and Braille note takers. I have one on screen now that has more cells in it than some of the other devices. And yes, you will notice there are 8 dots on these devices. And again, that's because the extra 2 dots serve a functionality with the electronic Braille. I have a picture of a Braille embosser. So if I need to emboss something up for my student on paper that's necessary for them to work on, we have a variety of Braille embossers and Braille transcription software out there for us to use. So in summary, there's so much more, and I'm always happy to communicate with anybody, but our students are really diverse. We are so fortunate to work with students from all over the world. We have students with all different vision abilities, all different functional vision characteristics, students with cortical vision impairment, students who have ocular motor considerations who may not technically meet a diagnosis under clinical terms, but in the education environment, they are impacted. So it's important to make sure you're communicating with that teacher of the blind and visually impaired so that if you suspect something is going on, they can help you with that process. And there are so many options out there to make sure we are providing a free and appropriate public education to our students. So thank you so much for your time. My name is Kim. You are welcome to email me at kavila@gmu.edu or visit us online at kihd.gmu.edu/vi. Thank you.